Fantasy football drafts are going fast and furious right now, folks. So we're getting a better look at player values as we get closer to the start of the NFL's regular season. How are you? I'm senior fantasy analyst Michael Fabiano here at Sports Illustrated. And I want to take you through a few players whose fantasy draft stock has risen over the last couple of weeks. And I want to start with Trey Lance. The movement that Lance's ADP has made over the last few weeks has been phenomenal, considering the player is not even guaranteed to start in week one. In fact, the Niners have already called Jimmy Garoppolo their week one starter. Now, why is there so much hype over Trey Lance? Well, first off, we all know he's a versatile player. He ran for over 1,000 yards in his second to last season at North Dakota State. And then in the first preseason week, what does he do? 80-yard bomb to Trent Sherfield against the Kansas City Chiefs. It's got everyone excited. Now, I like Trey Lance's skill set, and I think he could end up being a fantasy asset, but you may have to wait for your return on investment here because, again, Jimmy Garoppolo is scheduled to be the week one starter for the Niners, and this is a team that is built to win now. So if the Niners are 6-2 after their first 8 games under Garoppolo, will they pull the veteran who led them to a Super Bowl a couple of seasons ago? That's questionable. But if Lance gets a shot to be the starter at some point in the season, he could end up being a very valuable asset in the second half, and I think a lot of the fantasy analysts out there are showing it because his ADP has moved up, and he's being drafted ahead of half of the starting quarterbacks in the National Football League right now. Moving on to the running back position, and Javonte Williams. Now, Williams, of course, drafted in the second round by the Denver Broncos. He does have a big hurdle ahead of him in Melvin Gordon, who has just returned from a groin injury. And I still think Melvin Gordon's going to end up being the starter in Denver to start the season. Keep in mind that the Denver Broncos no longer have Phillip Lindsay on the roster. That's 125 touches that are now available, and most of them will likely be absorbed by Williams. And in his first preseason game, he looked pretty good. I mean, 29 yards on the ground on 5 attempts, scored a touchdown that was nullified by a holding penalty. But most people in the fantasy football industry expect Williams to potentially be this year's Cam Akers, in that maybe the impact won't be felt in the first half of the season, but in the second half, he could be an absolute fantasy football superstar. So Javonte Williams in some drafts is being drafted as an RB2. I think that's too rich for my blood. I'd rather have him as a flex. But Williams' stock is certainly on the rise among the fantasy football community. So for more players whose stock is on the rise, make sure you check out my column at si.com/fantasy. And of course, for all of your fantasy football needs, we are here to help you dominate your fantasy football draft. Go to si.com/fantasy.